Example 2. Determine an appropriate viewing rectangle for the function f of x, which is equal to the square root of 8 minus 2x squared, and use it to graph f. So in this scenario, we're given the function, and we don't have the x max and x min, or the y max or the y min, for us to be able to know what that viewing rectangle is. So the best way to do that when we have a function like this is to use what we already know, is to find the domain and the range of the function. So if we want to find the domain of this function, we know that the index is even, so that means the radicand 8 minus 2x squared must be greater than or equal to 0. Now if we subtract 8 to both sides to solve for x, we get negative 2x squared, which is greater than or equal to negative 8. And then when we divide both sides by a negative 2, that means we need to flip the inequality, so we get x squared is less than or equal to positive 4. So now when we take the square root of both sides, if we take the square root of x squared, that means we end up with absolute value of x, which is going to be less than or equal to the square root of 4, which is 2. So what does that tell us when we talk about the absolute value? Well, that means that x is going to be in between the two values of negative 2 and 2. So now when we want to find the range of this function, well, we know that this function, the square root of 8 minus 2x squared, is in between two numbers. Well, we know that this has to be greater than or equal to 0. So we know that the radical of 8 minus 2x squared, square root of that, has to be greater than or equal to 0. So we know that the minimum is going to be 0 for the range. And so if we're taking 8 and we're subtracting a number, that means that this would have to be less than or equal to the square root of 8, because that would have to be larger than the square root of 8 minus 2x squared. So if we simplify a little further, we know that this function, the square root of 8 minus 2x squared, is going to be in between 0, and if we reduce this or simplify the square root of 8, that becomes 2 times the square root of 2. So therefore this becomes the square root of 8 minus 2x squared will be in between 0 and approximating this to be 2.83. So what we can see here is that the domain over here becomes bracket negative 2 comma 2 with a bracket. So that's our x minimum and our x maximum. And then over here we have 0 and 2.83. So if we want to then graph this, then instead of going right at negative 2 and 2, what we can do is go one more further to go negative 3 to 3 as our viewing rectangle. So that's our x minimum and x maximum. And then over here, then we can rewrite this to be then negative 1, and maybe instead of going to 3, maybe we can go to positive 4 for our viewing rectangle. So now let's graph this on Desmos. So we're going to put in our function, which is the square root of 8 minus 2x squared. And then we're going to put in our viewing rectangle. So over here we'll select our wrench, and then we're going to put in negative 3 for the x minimum, and then we're going to put in positive 3 for the x max. We're going to put in negative 1 for the y minimum, and then we're going to put in 4 for the y maximum. So we can see here that our x-intercepts are negative 2, 0, and 2, 0. And we know up here we have our y-intercept which is 0, 2.828, or 2.83. So therefore, here is our graph. And again, what we had to do was we had to find the domain and range and go a little bit outside of that to be able to get our graph here